Check. Good. So I'm Max Ceron. Max Ceron, CWB Association Welding Podcast. Today we have a really cool guest, Welding Podcast.
The show is about to begin.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the CWB Association Podcast. My name is Max Ceron, and as always, I'm looking for the stories out there that are fantastic for us to bring to you, our faithful listeners. Today I have a wonderful lady here who I met at FabTech this year for the first time and was really starstruck by the amount of personality, intelligence, and knowledge she has for this wonderful industry of ours. Today we have Paisley Witkowski, who is a welding and metallurgical engineer, as well as the VP of Technical Services for the International Welding Bureau. Hey, Paisley, how you doing?
I'm doing well. And yourself, Max?
I'm doing good. It is freezing cold here in Regina, Saskatchewan. And I know you ran away from Canada a few years back, so you're probably not missing that Alberta cold right now.
Oh gosh, no. I spent almost 10 years in Fort McMurray, Alberta, so I'm not missing the negative 40 degrees at all. It's a balmy 10-15 degrees centigrade here in Houston, and that's cold.
Yeah, everyone's wearing jackets and layers, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Big shift in the temperature here.
Well, we're in the cold snap right now. I don't know if you guys watch the weather up here in Canada, but minus 40 would have been nice today. We were minus 52 with the wind chill this morning. And you know those days. There's only a few of those a year, but they're real bad.
I do not miss those days, especially waiting at the bus stop to go to the refinery. And it's negative 50, negative 60. And you get to your office and they're like, yeah, so we got a crack or a leak at the top of a tower and you have to climb it in that temperature. Super fun. Don't miss that at all.
Yeah, when the grip on your boots doesn't grip anymore, your gloves don't even bend anymore. It's all just as terrible.
Yeah, you've got snowflakes hanging from your eyelashes and you can feel your nose hairs.
Yeah, your nose hairs freeze. Yeah. So anyways, we gave a little bit about the beginning of your story, but Paisley, let's start at the beginning, right? Where are you from? Where's your roots?
Awesome. Well, I'm from a very rural farming community in Ontario. It was called Vanessa, Ontario. It's close to Port Dover, if anybody's familiar with that. And if you're not, it's about an hour and a half southwest of Toronto. Toronto, if you say it correctly. And yeah, I grew up out in a farming community. I always joke around that I was one of the best hoes that they had because that was one of my first jobs was hoeing fields. Believe it or not.
Yeah. So what kind of agriculture did you guys have there? What kind of farm?
I work predominantly in produce, so tomatoes, peppers, peas, watermelons, basically whatever we grew, apples, the whole works, beans, you name it.
And, in a rural community, there's kind of this mentality that everyone has to pull their weight around the farm. It's kind of the way it works, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I find that a lot of people that come from rural backgrounds are connected to the trades kind of inherently. Would you say that that's true for you, or how did you find, your journey into the trades?
Yeah, so definitely I agree with you 100%. There's no, oh, well, I'm tired, I'm taking a break on the farm. That don't happen. Suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
Get buck. But my stepfather was actually a foundry worker. So he was at a casting mill. And that's kind of how I got introduced to that. And my father has both mechanical and electrical engineering backgrounds. So I've always been kind of inherently around it, but never really took a major interest until, once I start going to school. But I've always been I call myself a tinker fairy, like Tinkerbell. I've always been a tinkerer. I've always sat there and gone through and tinkered with things and pulled things apart. And there's Scotty going behind me. Pulled things apart and try to put it back together and the whole works. So that's kind of the initial break off to it. So.
Now, in terms of, your desires, what was young Paisley dreaming of doing? When you were coming up, entering high school, people started asking you, what are you going to be when you grow up? What were your thoughts at that point?
Well, again, I've always been around, steel working and all that, my father used to drag race. So I used to love, going to the drag shows. And I was like, like, I'm going to become a mechanic. That's going to be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
coolest job in the world. I'm going to become a mechanic. It's going to be so awesome. And my stepfather was like, hey, well, like, you got a little something going on up here. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Why don't you try something else? And I said, okay, maybe I'll look into this engineering thing. That seems kind of cool. And it was very interesting because I was never a very academically smart person per
Mm-hmm.
se. Always a very hard worker, but never top of the class.
Yeah.
So once I saw in this engineering thing, I was like, oh, well, I got to get there. And I started off thinking, okay, automotive engineering. That's going to be the bee's knees. I get the best world of mechanics and cars, and I still get to do additional stuff too and do more engineering stuff, which at the time I had no clue what that actually meant. I'll be very honest.
Yeah, but it's a good pick in Ontario where the automotive sector has been boss for 50
Mm-hmm.
years, right? So, I mean, you really can't put a stick into that and say that it's bad, right? Sounds like a good choice all around.
Yeah, it was awesome. I went to school in Windsor, which is border to Detroit, where the big three are. So it
Mm-hmm.
just totally made sense. Um, and then from there, and I'll kind of segue into it, I found my way out into a co-op or an internship totally by fluke. I was just shooting resumes out left, right, and
Yeah,
center, and
yeah.
all I had was farm work on my resume. and
Professional
and
hoer.
yeah, slave labor. And it was really interesting because it was during the high time of oil. And for those of you who are familiar, and I'm sure a lot of our colleagues and friends and those are listening are familiar with the oil sands up in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they wanted warm bodies. They didn't care who was coming. I'll be very blunt about it.
Yeah.
And so I threw my name in the hat, forgot about it, and I was out working on the farm over one summer, and some person from Suncor called me up, and I'm like, what the heck is this Suncor? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
this? And they're like, hey, can you do an interview? I was like, sure, I guess so.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of got introduced into the oil sands.
So what was your degree in? Mechanical engineering or automotive engineering? What was specifically, what did you study?
So I studied mechanical engineering.
Mm-hmm.
After I completed my internship, I switched from mechanical engineering with a specialization in automotive to materials or metallurgy in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So my technical education is mechanical engineering with a specialty in metallurgy. So you kind of got a little extra courseware, so to speak, or whatnot. I'm heavily involved in metallurgy, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like the right path to take to get into northern Alberta. I mean, at that time, we're talking early 2000s here. This was like the boom of Alberta because Alberta has always been oil rich. I mean, Western Canada's kind of always been oil rich in general, but there was like finally like the heavy investment to get it out, right? Like
Yes.
let's like okay, now we're going to be serious about this. We're going to invest into infrastructure, refineries,
Mm-hmm.
pipelines, and let's get it out, right?
Yeah.
Now you get the call out there, and what are you thinking? Because moving from Southern Ontario to Northern Alberta, let me tell you, I know these places well. They're not the same. They're not the same, right? I tell you. So, what were your initial thoughts of a rural woman from Southern Ontario moving up to Northern Alberta?
I'll preface this with I've always been a risk taker, and I'm kind of like, as you met in FabTech, sometimes completely off the rails. I've always been that way, even since I've been a child.
Yeah.
And I will never forget this. I think we had like $283 and some odd cents in my bank account. I bought a one-way plane ticket and
Mm-hmm.
packed my one suitcase and carry-on, which I don't know. I think about it now. I'm like, I could fit just my shoes in one suitcase.
Yeah, exactly.
Packed my suitcase, got off at the airport, and it was the old airport at the time, so there wasn't much
Mm-hmm.
there. There was a really nasty old subway and a chunk luggage thing, and I got
Yeah.
off, and I had no idea where to go, what to do. And I stepped out, and for those of you who've been in Fort McMurray and near the oil sands, there's a very particular smell of the
Smell.
oil sands.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very particular smell, especially in the extraction world. And I was like,
That bitumen smell.
yeah, what is that? And I was like, couldn't figure it out, obviously, for the longest time. Got in the taxi, went to our housing location, and very fortunately, at that time, again, everybody was pretty heavy on the oil money, so everything was all paid for aside from the plane ticket. I had to buy the plane ticket,
Mm-hmm.
and I just showed up and unpacked my suitcase and sat there, and they had a little welcome pack, and I was like, oh, I got to take a bus. Nice, that's cool, because I had no idea how I was going to get to and from site.
The site,
Absolutely no idea. I was like, okay, perfect, I can find the bus stop. And I just looked out the window, and I very vividly remember, again, for those of you who are from the West, a massive like raven came and sat on the balcony, and it scared the out of me.
They're huge.
They're massive. They're bigger than dogs.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just looking at me, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
And they're like as
what
smart
is
as a
this?
human. They're freaky. They like look at you, and you know there's intelligence behind those eyes.
Oh, totally. They just look right into you. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, I guess we're here. Sat on the sofa and waited to go to work the next couple days.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean that's an omen. That's an omen. A big raven at your window. Ravens usually don't get that close to you. Usually you can tell when there's a raven nearby because all the birds stop chirping. Right?
Mhm.
Like all the birds are chirp, 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 and then everyone goes silent. That's a raven.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
They're like, I'm here now. Everyone shut up. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah, exactly.
that next morning, you get up, you put on your boots, you put on your work clothes, you get on the bus. Did you have any clue what it was expected that you were going to be doing that day?
Absolutely no idea. I knew we were doing an orientation. All the co-op students had been kind of gathered, and it was really neat, honestly. They had put us all in this one condo building, and they're all 2-bed, 2-bath condos, and it's full of like university and college students, right? That don't have to pay for living accommodations.
Yeah.
They have a cleaner that comes every week. And we all showed up on the bus. Nobody knew anybody. There's like that awkward, you're all sitting at the bus stop being like, I know you're also like me, but like, I don't really like.
And where are
know
we
you
going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get on this bus, and then you start chatting with people. Again, I'm a very social butterfly, friendly person. I'm like, hey, so are you a student? They're like, yeah, I'm a student. I'm like, cool, all right. Where are we going? They're like, I don't know, told us to get on this bus. I'm like, all right, well, here we are.
Let's go.
We all pile off. And they had some cute little welcome bags. And I'm like, oh, it's like a birthday party. How fun is this? This is really exciting. I get a condo for free. I get to take the bus for free. And they're giving me a little birthday welcome bag. That's
little swag
fun.
bag right off the top. Yeah.
Yeah, swag bag. And then finally you line up, and then they start going over the orientation. And that was my really first, that couple days was my first aspect of like real safety training. I had never in my life had really safety training other than the scare factors that we had when like the farmers, like the big time farmers would come and like put a carrot in like a piece of machinery and be like, that's your finger. Don't put your finger in things. So it was a very different approach to things. And it was very fun and uplifting, if you will.
Well, they really tried to, I mean, we still try to make safety be more inherently natural and less, like if you stay on it all the time, then it's less of a big deal. But I remember the first time I started taking safety training, and I was thinking about my dad being like, my dad don't do none of that stuff. Like
Safety glasses, what's that? Aren't their regular glasses do the same thing?
Yeah,
no,
that's why you blink. Right? Like
yeah. And move fast.
Yeah, exactly. So you get to the job, and what's the learning curve like now? Like you start figuring out the expectations of your life, of your job. Were you in for it? Was it good?
Oh yeah, it's very interesting. And I always tell, especially I mentor a lot of students to date, and have and will continue on. And I always tell students, the very first part of my career, especially in the oil sands, was not very fun. It was data entry. They were trying to get everything from these like, horrid closets that gosh knows how long they've been sitting there, and dust and this and that, and putting everything into a computer program. And there was myself and another student that was in that kind of role, and some other students in other groups. And I remember thinking, okay, cool, I got this easy, copy, paste, typey, read, typey. And then like a month in, I'm like, okay, I'm bored. Like, what else?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, this is your
going to
job.
be like years of this.
Yeah. And I'm like, what? Like, this is not fun at all. And they're like, no, well, like, you're doing really good. You're like, your numbers are great. And I'm like, oh, what about the other kid? And they're like, well, like his numbers are okay. And I'm like, okay. So I had deviated a plan being like, hey, if I get this much done, can I go try this other like engineering work? All of the other students are doing these like cool jobs, if you will. And obviously the grass is always greener on the other side, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, hard no. I was like, okay, cool. So I sat there and looked at how many input like pieces of equipment the other student put in, and I just did 30% more every day and had all of this excess time. So I started popping around and asking the other students what they were doing and this and that, and start getting little bits of information, and we all talk. So I'm like, oh, this RAK thing seems cool, which just stands for replacement in kind. Nothing fancy, nothing super technical. Something's broke, worn out, whatnot, what have you. And it's lasted long enough, so we'll replace it with the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to put together a little scope of work or an engineering package, how to go through things. So meanwhile, I'm getting all my data entry points in between trying to do these RAKs. And again, data entry, not very fun. RAKs at the time was super exciting.
Compared to the data entry. Yeah.
I got to go talk to these people called inspectors.
Ooh.
Wow, what is that? Inspector, that's cool. And so my manager caught wind of it and it was like, hey, no, you're supposed to be doing data entry. And I was like, well, I've been doing way more production than this other kid. He's like, hard no, data entry. So me being me, and I'm a very flamboyant person, I was like, okay, cool. I know how to play this game. Every time I watched his calendar, this sounds terrible, and I hope he's not listening. I'd watch his calendar, and when I know his meetings were, or this or that, then I'd go and do my work.
Yeah.
Come back from Christmas break, to negative, 50, negative 60, super fun. Did not have appropriate clothing at the time either. I remember going and buying my first winter jacket and be like, $600. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but you need that $600 jacket though.
Yeah, well worth it.
Yeah.
And I came back, my manager came in and was like, hey, we got to talk. And I was like, oh, I'm getting fired. Oh no, I'm getting fired. Apparently, one of the other managers that I've been helping out with the other students caught wind of me doing this, maintaining my job, doing my other stuff, and was like, hey, we need a student to help us out on this thing called a turnaround. I was like, what do you mean?
Fun, shutdown time.
Yeah. I was like, I have no idea what that is, but count me in. Do I still have to do the data entry? And he said no. And I was like, double count me in. So that's how I got introduced to the turnaround world. And from there, it was just exciting. I was running around doing prep work, walking down jobs. And again, like at the time, it was the coolest thing ever. Do I think walking up and down pipe racks now is super fun? No, but at the time, it was the coolest thing.
Well, it's new, right? It's all new.
Yeah. And you don't know what's here or there, and designing different configurations. And I remember very clearly I had designed a configuration for some piping, and I think it was like the execution manager, somebody from execution, and he came in and like pounded on my desk. Are you Paisley? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, get your boots on. Do you know how to tie your boots? And I'm like, yeah, I know how to tie my boots. What are you talking about? Come with me. I'm like, okay. Permit office, sign in. And he's like got papers in his hand, and I could tell that they were my papers. And I was like, oh, that's my job scope. Yeah. And he's like, I won't elaborate on the words that he used for it, but it wasn't very positive. And he's like, do you have a measuring tape? I'm like, yeah, I got a measuring tape. He's like, measure here to here. And I'm like, okay. He's like, measure here to here. And I'm like, okay. And like halfway through, I ran into a structural beam.
Right. And typical engineering moment where like what you drew will not work.
Yeah. It's like, how the am I supposed to put a goddamn pipe through this? And I'm like, oh, go around it. And he's like, I can't just do that. I need it lined out. And it was a very eye-opening moment for me. Because you got to sit down and walk everything through. And like, it was a very intense moment. Fortunately, I've had that experience from my farming days. I do remember talking to some other students that had not been from the farming background and kind of lived in, I don't want to say bubbles, but more friendly childhood, so to speak, and had never been, yelled at and
dressed down. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, yeah, I should probably like look at every single detail. And
Well,
that's what I did.
turnarounds or shutdowns, as people call them, there's a magic in the air, right? Because everything's about to hit the fan, but everyone knows it's about to hit the fan, right? It's
Yep.
like you're planning to throw the poop into the fan
Yep.
and figure out how to fix it because things are already broke. Things are going to get upgraded. Things haven't been working for a bit. And you got 2 weeks to rip everything apart. But while you're ripping that apart, hey, let's do all these 300 other things at the same time, right? So it is a really crazy time when the iron workers show up, the pipe fitters show up, the boilermakers show up, the millwrights show up. Everyone's there, electricians, everyone, and it's like,
Yep.
giver. You got
Yep.
you got 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever they say it's going to be, and scaffolds go up, and then it's go time. And
Yep.
I loved doing it when I was younger for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yep.
money was great. The money's insane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But
These paychecks are great.
but my body and mind got tired of it, and kudos to the people that can do that for their lives, because I met guys and girls that were on shutdown teams for 30 years and still
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
I did it for maybe 10, and I was like, that's it. No more.
Yeah. 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 And it's I like that you put it, it has like a magical sense to it. Cause I love turnarounds. I
Mhm.
love turnarounds. If I could do a turnaround every year, I would. My husband is not too keen on me going out and being in the field as much anymore, but I love it. Like you know it's coming. You know it's gonna be a goat rodeo.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know it.
You know
You
it.
know, like you fought so hard to get scope in, and they're like, "Nah, we don't need to do that." And you know, as soon as you open the equipment up, it's gonna be fucked up. You know
Yeah,
it.
you know it. And you have a group of tradespeople waiting to fix it.
Yes.
And you got to
Yes.
trust on their skill and their ability, and it gets done.
100%.
It gets done.
100%. 100%. And if it doesn't get done, it gets done right on night shift. I've learned that very well.
That's funny because I was always night crew. I was like, oh, why'd these dum-dums leave for me now? Like,
Yes. If you've done it right, do it on nights. That's what it's saying.
so you're doing some time at Suncor. You're up north. How long did you do that for before you decided to bounce to your next gig?
Well, I had at the time, I think it was an 8-month co-op, and I had it extended for just over a year, I believe. Went back to school, and that's where I had my, oh my gosh, like this materials of metallurgy, this cracking corrosion thing is like,
Super
there's
cool.
something to say about this. This is A, really freaking cool, and B, like and I'll be honest, I've always been a greedy. I like money in my pocket. I like fancy stuff, and I was like, this pays way better than the automotive stuff.
Oh,
It's
for
way
sure.
better.
Yeah.
So finished up that, and then I needed to work right away. I didn't have a place to go after I finished school, so I started chunking out resumes, and then Suncor hired me right out of school. Like, I think I went on like a 2-week vacation after finals, and then went right back up to Fort McMurray to go work, and
Same
started
group?
it all again.
Were you back in the same area, same site?
No, different site. So I went to Syncrude, which is a little further down. And there's some difference in some units or whatnot. And thinking, yeah, I got this. I love this turnaround thing. And initially, what they had already filled up the 2 junior engineering positions. And I remember my manager saying, "Hey, are you okay being like an inspector? Like, we need somebody to go out to the field." And I was like, "Yeah, of course."
Yeah, it's fun.
Absolutely. So I worked as an inspector. I didn't get my API tickets because that's just not how the policy goes when you're a new hire, but I worked under 510, 570s. And then I was doing a bunch of UT and MT and PT as well, which was really cool. For the non-registered stuff, obviously, the registered equipment, you need proper qualified and certified people. But it was really neat too, because then I got really the hands-on aspect of like, hey, this is how UT is done, or ultrasonic thickness. You can do thickness, or this is how you do surface breaking crack detection, or any of that. And
why?
It was really,
yeah.
It was really neat because you actually get to use. And I'm very vividly getting handed a set of nunchucks, and I'm like, what the heck is this for? They're like, oh, go do mag, and I'm like, I don't even know what you mean. But after I
If
found
you got
out
a
that they actually,
pacemaker, you can't use it.
I then found out you could get the electronic yokes, which were way better than the nunchucks.
Yeah, the
But
yokes are
yeah,
easier to use anyways. Yeah.
so I got this whole feel, I think a very good feel of how inspection is done in addition to like, and I hadn't even really worked as a true engineer at this point. And I got to see how things are built, how things are, repaired. I'd do the follow-ups of the repairs, go through the inspections, and have a really hands-on approach, which I think worked really well in coming right out of school. Because again, school is awesome. I learned lots of cool stuff, but most of what I've learned in my career has been after I got that piece of paper.
Oh, for sure. I always
Like,
tell people that diploma, that certificate, that's your ticket to the starting line.
mm-hmm.
That's just that there ain't no finish line. You just got through the prep to get your
Yes.
ticket to get to the starting line. And now the real race starts, right?
Yeah, that's the real shit happens.
Yeah.
All those fun calculus classes and this and that, which I did not do well in at all, be full transparency. It's like, oh man, that was like, obviously was useful for something, but what I'm doing right now is not useful.
So how long did you spend in the oil sands in total?
Oh my gosh, it was about 10, just under around 10 years or so.
So 10 years is a serious amount of time. Like you're building a life now. Like are you like buying a house here in Edmonton or in Fort Mac, or are you just renting? Like, I
No.
mean, what's the gypsy life of Paisley look like over those 10 years?
I was just renting a condo, and just working. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think I ever did 40 hours. I didn't know what 40 hours would be like a vacation. Like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
40 hours. Like, oh, I don't do 40 hours.
Silly.
Like, yeah. So no, I just rented and I was like, all right, cool. At that time, I'm like, I'm gonna be a lifer. I'm gonna I'm gonna do all the cool stuff. I transitioned obviously into engineering at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm just gonna help do turnarounds forever and always. We had a metals lab on site too, which was superb.
For like
And we had a
metrology, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we had full band, all the saws,
Mm-hmm.
we could do micros, macros, like a whole bunch of stuff, which was really cool. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna do all of this stuff. We had a big shop on there too. We had 3 shops actually. And I was like, yeah, I'll just keep working doing turnarounds. And that's that. And I'll just be here forever. No real sight on, you know, buying a house at the time. It was just
Mm-hmm.
work, work, work. I want to be the best. And I was at the end and still to this day at some points, if something was like messed up, okay, Paisley will do it. Paisley will do it. I was the emergency, the fires, the loss of containments, like the crazy
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
got it. And that's what I wanted to be known for.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it gives you a niche, right? It gives you a protected position because you can't have everyone be an apple. You need a grapefruit here and there to make and that's important in this industry for people that are really keen with climbing the ladder or moving up, or you got to find a niche that separates you from the rest. I mean, if you don't
totally.
do that, why would anyone look at you at all?
Totally. And it's really interesting, especially in like the materials or metallurgical realm in the engineering world, especially in the oil sands, is like there is a big ceiling. You can't just become a higher level engineer. The only thing to get more progressed in the corporate ladder, so to speak, is to move into management. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to deal with people. I want to do cool shit. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to deal with
Where are
cracks
those
and
jobs?
corrosion.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was told very clearly, like, you gotta wait till the other guy dies, and in front of him, there's 2 or 3 other people. So
Mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
so
It's a tight race.
I just figured I'd just be engineer gal forever, and I was totally cool with that. And given the same opportunities, I would be very cool with it still going forward.
So what happened? You say you're 10 years in the oil sands. If I'm doing the math in my head, you already got past the 2008 drop because 2008 was an ugly drop for oil and
Yeah.
in Western Canada. We learned a lot, though, about resource management at that time
Mm-hmm.
because we did get a bit greedy on the bubble, coming
Yeah.
up. And you learned some lessons getting greedy on the bubble. It happens to all industries.
Mm-hmm.
You Sounds like you survived that. You didn't lose your job. You got through that. So what happened? What drove you out of that area?
So it was Christmas time, and I had always worked holidays. I loved working holidays, A, because hopefully there's not a lot of stuff going on, and B, everybody's on vacation. So when you want to take your big month-long vacation to Europe, everybody's like, oh, you covered my Christmas and all that. Perfect, no problem.
Yeah,
It was Christmas time. There's no materials engineers anywhere near site. I am it. And I'm like, okay. And we had a pretty significant leak in one of we call them off legs, once through hot water generator, I believe. Can't remember what it stands for. In my units, because I had owned or was responsible for all of the utilities at that time. And I'm like, okay, cool, like whatever, typical crack, cut her out, repair it, weld it up, let her buck, no problem. Anyways, a few days later, the inspector, one of my buddies, calls up and he's like, hey, you know that crack? And I'm like, yeah, get it fixed. He's like, well, we went to go hydrostatically test it, where you pump it all the water and pressurize it to make sure there's no leaks. He's like, well, there's like 20 more. And I'm like, what do you mean there's 20 more? Like,
what?
He's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's a problem. And so we get some samples. I try to do assessment, and I'm like, I can't figure out what this like damage mechanism is.
Yeah, what's happening here? Yeah.
It's not based off of anything that we have, listed out in our equipment strategies. This doesn't make any sense. Go through the history. There's a bunch of history of this mysteriously happening sometimes, not all the time, sometimes. And I went to my level of capacity, and I went to my leader and I said, I don't know what else to do. Like, we need to get this thing up and running. We can't leave it down. I don't know what else to do. And one of the mechanical engineers had said, hey, I know this guy. He works for a consulting company. Give him a call. Tell him you're a friend of mine and explain to him what the problem is, and he'll be able to help out. Okay, cool, no problem. Call up the guy, explain him, and he's like, yeah, we've got people that can help with that. Awesome. Get the PO, the whole works. We go through the assessments, do that all song and dance. We figure out a somewhat, ideology of how to mitigate it and get it up and running, repaired, and all that. I'm like, okay, cool, hunky dory, we're done. It's midway in January at that point, and this is like just at the beginning of COVID too, I believe.
Like 2019, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, he calls me up, and this guy lives in Hawaii, first of all. Like, and I'm like, geez, must be nice. Like,
yeah.
And he's like, oh yeah, no, we do this consulting stuff, and we consult all over the world. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, how do I get a job where I get to live in Hawaii and just do, metallurgical engineering? That's cool. And he's like, well, I have a job that you might like. And he's like, you're one of the very few engineers that actually has a big personality. He's like, I could use somebody like you. And I was like, me? Like me? Like all your people have like 30 plus, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
I kid you not. Some of them are in their 90s, experience. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, before engineering was even invented.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there was dinosaurs out, and like, you got to be careful for stegosaurus, like the whole thing. And so I considered it, and I said, sure, I'll apply. Did the interviews, and the people were like, yeah. So I let my current boss know, and said, my leader, and said, hey, like, I'm gonna go and pursue this consulting thing. And he was sad to let me go, but he had said, and we had talks before. He's like, you doing just engineering here, you're gonna be stuck doing the same repairs over and over. And he's like, you're already in it. I'm like, I can tell you what area in the in the FCC reactor is going to need repair next. I can tell you in the hydrocracker, like, and he's like, no, if you want to stay technical, that's going to be your best career. So I had moved over and switched out of the working for an owner operator and went into the consulting world, which was a total difference. I had always worked for owner operators, always. And then switching over to consulting was a very big culture shock. That was probably more of a culture shock than moving all the way from Ontario to Fort McMurray. Significant.
I could totally see that, but I can also see a similarity there, because when you get into the consulting world, it's like every time someone calls, it's a new turnaround, because it's always like a new, what the heck is going on? It's a disaster. This needs to happen right now. There's a sense of emergency and a sense of unknown, right? So I could see that still being kind of a part of that. I mean, depending on which consulting world you go into, because there's consulting for like, oh, my brine lines are not
Yeah.
pumping the fluid they should pump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's other consulting work, which is different, right? So, this consulting company you went to will work for, did you have to leave where you were living? Did you have to move? What was the deal?
No, it was completely remote. I could live wherever I wanted. And again, coming from a rural farming community and then now living in Fort McMurray, that's where my life was. I was like, even though I worked all the time, I had a very close-knit group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I had stayed there for quite some time, I think a few months. And then I said, do you know what? Like, I've always liked Calgary. Like, I've gone on vacation to Calgary. Why don't I move to Calgary? Well, my first choice was Vancouver, and then I looked at how much the cost of living was.
Yep.
And that was very quickly annexed from the list.
My family lived in Vancouver for like 20 years. I was like, what are you guys doing? My mom and dad were out there. My dad was a Boilermaker. I mean, as a Boilermaker, you make enough money that he's okay. But
yeah,
I think back and I'm like, if you would have worked 20 years anywhere else in Canada, you would have had so much more money. But whatever.
So I was like, Calgary seems cool. So I called up, and again, this is in the midst of COVID, like COVID happening, nobody's working at the refineries, everybody's at home. And I had found a cool condo and did a FaceTime, of a walkthrough, and I was like, all right,
done.
I'll sign the lease, no problem, send it over. And the guy was shook. He's like, what do you mean you signed the lease? Don't you come look at it? And I was like, no, I'm good, it looks cool.
Yeah.
All the movers let's go.
Yeah, on the way.
Yeah, so I had then moved down to Calgary, which was another really fun adventure. Coming from Fort McMurray, which you're very familiar with. I just recently watched Landman with my husband, which was very interesting because there was a lot of parallels to that town.
I've heard that show is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, like when they have the Patch Cafe, and I'm like, oh, that's like definitely the brew house. Like everybody's showing up to the bar, Nomex,
everyone's reflective.
One coffee shop, maybe two. We started to get a little more later on, but I was like, oh. So coming from a refinery town where everybody is somehow associated to the refinery to a very large city. And it was very eye-opening. It was very lonely at first, I'll be honest, because there's so many people, but nobody really. You got to try really hard to make friends because you're not working with them.
That's right. All right. Well, this is a great time to take a break for our advertisers, because then when we get back, I'd love to hear about how this adventure in Calgary, took off, and how you got from the consulting business you were in now or then to the one you have now. So we'll be right back here on the CWB Association podcast with Paisley. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after these messages.
The CWB Association is new and improved and focused on you. We offer a free membership with lots of benefits to anyone interested in joining an association that is passionate about welding. We are committed to educating, informing, and connecting our workforce. Gain access to your free digital publication of the Weld magazine, free online training, conferences, and lots of giveaways. Reach out to your local CWB Association chapter today to connect with other welding professionals and share welding as a trade in your community. Build your career, stay informed, and support the Canadian welding industry. Join today and learn more at cwbassociation.org.
And we are back here on the CWB Association podcast. Thank you so much for staying with us. Right before the break, me and Paisley were talking about how she started working for this new consulting company, decided to move down to Calgary, Cowtown, as we say out here in the West. And, I mean, they don't say that in Calgary. They don't like it when you say that, but we say that outside of Calgary. But, what's going on now? So you get your condo in Calgary. You're working for the consulting firm. What's the plan?
Yeah, so a little side mission on that too with the consulting company. I don't want to say sold, but this ideology, you got to do all the, metallurgical engineering, all the welding stuff, because I had, basically established a welding program at Syncrude prior, and I loved it, loved the welding world. I was like, oh, well, I can do this and help all these clients. And I was like, yeah, cool, that's awesome. And then same thing back to my very first job. We're like, well, actually, there's all this paperwork stuff.
Just data entry.
Yeah, like almost the same as data entry, doing these I think wretched documents, but and they're like, yeah, we need all these done, and they kept saying, okay, get this done, and then you'll get to go do it, and get this done, and then I was like, I know this song and dance, not gonna happen. So I said, you know what? I will take this in my own hands again and start reaching out to the other departments. And I was like, hey, I'm a welding engineer. I help with repairs, turnarounds, all that stuff. I know y'all do a lot of turnaround work. Again, having to maintain my regular duties of doing the not so cool, fun consulting work, but also getting tidbits of the exciting stuff. Word got around, and I ended up being, again, silly busy. Silly busy. I had tried to justify to the consulting company that welding was like kind of a really big deal and people need welding help. Well, no. Welding's just easy. You just get a weld procedure and the welders do it. And there's no,
there's no science behind that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it just, well, it's baked in. It's not, you can't make a career out of that. For me, I was like, I don't know. Like, it seems to be a big thing. And I, leading up into this, there was a very large conference here in the States that was happening for API. And I said, hey, can I go to this API conference? Like, we're sending like 30 people. Like, I would be an awesome person to go to this conference. And it was shot down. No, we have other people going. And I was like, okay, cool, no big deal. And I was a little butthurt. I'm not gonna lie. I was like,
yeah, for sure.
Heck?
Yeah.
Like, you're sending all these introverted people to a conference. Like, what the heck?
And
like,
none of them are going to come back with anything useful. Send me and I can come back with so much.
Yeah. Like, like we can, like, I used to sell at the farmer's market. I can sell tomatoes and peppers to anybody, let alone engineering services. Like, I was like, all right, cool. Well, my mentor, who you, I believe, met as well, Bill Newell, had said, hey, we're having this other conference a few weeks later called the Welding Summit. Why don't you see if you can come? I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, sure. He gave me a discount code, and I went to my management and said, hey, I know y'all had so much fun. Or I didn't say y'all at the time because I was still Canadian. But I was like, oh, you guys had an awesome time in this conference, blah, blah. Like, there's this welding one. It's only a couple days. I got a discount code. It's super inexpensive. Like, can I go to it? And I remember my manager being like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, let me just throw you a bone. Like, because I've always done a lot of work. I was like, okay. And I was one of his favorites. I still don't know why he didn't send me the other conference, but hindsight, I'm glad that worked out. I go to the Welding Summit, arrive in Houston, Texas, get off the plane and say, oh my gosh, it's like hot. Like in August.
Yeah, you're plus
like,
30. Yeah.
Like, how do people live like this? This is wretched. This is terrible. I do not enjoy this at all. Okay, show up, check in the hotel, and Bill texts me. He's like, hey, when you get here, come to the restaurant. We've got a big group of people. Like, awesome, cool. Super awesome. Go down, drop my stuff off, go down there, and I meet Bill, who was the first time I actually had met him in person. I had
face to face, yeah.
Yeah, plenty of Zoom meetings, Teams calls, what have it. Lots of texting back and forth. He's been a major influence in my career to date. And he introduces me to this table. And there was a very particular person that called himself Big Sexy, who's now my husband. And I enjoyed the conference. I learned a lot. I met a lot of people. I went back to Canada, to Calgary, with a whole new outlook, saying, no, I was right. There is a massive need in industry for welding people, especially welding engineers, or people that have hands-on physical experience, not just engineers that have a cool piece of paper hanging up, And so I started, poking and prodding and being what else and pushing. And it's very funny because eventually Scotty was like, hey, like, you're getting kind of taken advantage of. Like, you're not getting to do what you enjoy doing. You're not getting paid as much as you could be. He's like, you're not even enjoying what you're doing. You're up to 2-3 a.m. every night working. Plus you're trying to maintain some sort of life. Like, why don't you come to Texas and work? And I was like, come to Texas and work? What do you mean come to Texas and work? What am I going to do? Just get up and go to Texas? And he's like, yeah, why not? I was like, okay, cool.
Well,
So I
Calgary
told
is kind of like mini Texas, right? It's not that big of a stretch.
it is there are similarities.
Mm-hmm.
So I had told my boss, and he had a little hissy fit, I'll be honest. And I was like, well, I'm going to do what I want to do. Either I'm going to work for you or I'm not. So
Yeah.
take it or leave it. And he poo-pooed after a little bit, and I moved to Texas, still working for the company,
Mm-hmm.
getting paid in Canadian, which was not very fun when you're living in Texas. um, and then I was like, you know what, this really isn't working out for me. This is
Yeah.
like it's the vibes are off. We're not aligned. I'm not really,
You're not
enjoying
feeling
this.
content.
Yeah. So I had switched departments into the mechanical engineering um, group, so to speak, or department, and it was kind of the same song and dance. They're trying to really, in the terms of my old manager, is keep lightning in a bottle, which was kind of positive to hear that, but also negative to hear that. And I was like,
Yeah.
you know what? Again, this isn't working out. And I quit. I
Yeah.
was like, no. I ended up getting a job for a very small amount of time. I think it was like 2.5 months as a quality manager at a fabrication shop here. And oh my gosh, I would take lickings like no problem in Fort McMurray, but it was not fun doing it the second time around.
You were done with that part of your life?
I was like, I am done with this. Learned a lot about the fabrication world because I'd always heard about it, from the other side, or approved procedures, ITPs, and all that jazz. But yeah, I was like, you know what? 2.5 months. I think it might have been just under 3 months. Like, I'm out. I'm done. Peace. See you later. Take my computer. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna figure it out. And that's what I did. Sat at home for a little while. Fortunately, Scotty was very supportive of that and saying, hey, like, you got to do what's good for you. And then I kept getting phone calls. Hey, where are you working? Hey, where are you working? Hey, where are you working? Hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Like, yeah, but I don't really got a job. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, can
You don't
you
need
like,
one. Yeah.
he's like, and I kept getting calls. So, and then Scotty's like, well, why don't you run your consulting business out of his business, his and Juby's business? And I said, well, yeah, okay. Well, I just got to cross back into Canada, get my visa updated,
Yeah,
obviously
yeah,
a
for
bunch of all
work
the
now,
additional
yeah.
paperwork, work visa, blah, blah, blah. It's not that easy. So that's what I did. And then basically got to be my own boss and pick my clients and do what I enjoy, which is really fun.
Now, with the amount of work that is in Texas that is welding and metallurgical related, I've seen different numbers, but some say that there's more outside of Texas or in Texas, but it's up there. It's big, right? Now,
Yeah.
do you keep busy enough with consulting work just in your area, or are you still picking up like international work, or even work in Canada, or even work back up in the Mac?
Yeah, I could, if I just wanted to stay on the ship channel, that would be very doable. I don't want to say I'm very selective with my clients, but I try not to take on too much because that's just, you'll detriment yourself. But yeah, I work all over. I still do a lot of stuff back home in Canada, phone calls, this and that, reviews, go back to sites. I flew up to a few sites, not this last year, but prior. I do a lot of work up in the Ohio area, and it's a bunch of those refineries, Iowa, California, like all over,
All
basically.
over, yeah.
Yeah. So if I wanted to stay busy, I could stay here. But what I end up doing, and this sounds probably terrible, is I try to help my friends out, and I know,
Yeah.
and people that are, they're not just looking to have a rubber stamp on a piece of paper saying, oh, an engineer blessed this. No, I want them to actually have the heart in
Faith.
it for the repairs,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Well, and that network is key, right? Like, you find the people that are always the busiest and have the best careers are the ones that give the most, because it's not just about the job, it's about your relationship with the people within the jobs, and even how people talk about you after the fact, right? Like, once you're gone, people still talk, right?
Oh,
So you, like, I mean, you gotta ensure that if you're doing a great job, good, that's fine. Everyone expects you to do a great job. That's your job. But
Yeah.
what was your attitude during that job? What was your right? Like, how much
hmm
did you put of yourself into it?
Totally. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I'm a 0 or 100%. Like, you either get absolutely nothing from me or you get 100%. There's not really a middle ground.
Yeah, good to know. If you don't answer a call, I know you're at 0.
Yeah. That's very much so.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So,
Now, what about, like when I met you, you're at Fab Tech. I met you at Jason's open house there. I know Jason and Scott go back a ways. I've known Bill for a while. There's weird connections that start to happen when you start running into people. Plus, you're like, I'm from Canada. It's like, what are you doing here? Like what,
yeah.
how did you get into those circles? What do you do at Fab Tech? What is it that you do now,
Yeah, I'm a big supporter and promoter of educating people, both younger and older, in those sense. FabTech, I always like going and chit chatting with people. I help out a lot of our friends and close business relations as well. So FabTech in total, while I was there last year, was helping out Juvie with TipTig, the TipTig booth,
Mm-hmm.
and introducing people to TipTig, talking about the productivity, the efficiencies that can do that. And that was really, really neat. I really enjoy interacting with people, and you're not salesy by any means. You're like, hey, like, what
It's
do you do?
informative. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you talk to people like, what's your issue? Like, this may or may not help you. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about it. In terms of like getting with the circles of people and all that, definitely Scotty and Bill have helped out a lot. And then obviously attending more events. I attend a silly amount of things every year, including a bunch of things from AWS, ASME, APIs, a bunch of women's network things. Like, you just
Mm-hmm.
got to be involved, ASTM, and you just show up and hang out with people and chit chat. And like you said, it's really interesting how big but how small the industry is,
Right.
because you can know so many people, and then they know, and other people know other people, and it's like, how did you never meet? It's
That's
really
right.
cool. And then when you meet, you're like, oh,
Yeah, 2 ships in the night, right? Like, whoa, what?
yeah, yeah. So just, putting myself out there, I think, is helpful. And I would recommend everybody to do that, even if you're not as extroverted as myself. Like, even just showing up and just saying hi to one person. Like, I've had some very shy students that I've mentored, and I'm like, all you got to do is show up and just say hi.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it. And if that's all you got for the day,
Good. It's a win. Mhm.
yes, you know, then try to say hi, how are you? And maybe go back to that person the next day, and those networks are, invaluable. Like you talked about earlier,
Mhm.
people always remember you for how you acted or what your vibes are, your like your general personality or person, so to speak. Not about
Yeah,
how smart or cool you are, or how many jobs you closed or this or that. They remember you as a person.
that's right. That's right. And the impact you give. We're all like, we're all stardust. We're walking around with these energies. And at the end of the day, the job is the job, but it's about how you tackle it, how you are, how you leave it, the impression. All those things matter in the long run. I remember telling young students once about like my resume when I applied to be a job to teach at the university, and I put a job on my resume of a place I got fired from.
Mhm.
And when I went for my interview, they're like, "Why would you include a place you got fired from on for your references? You got a lifetime of successful jobs, but you picked one that you got fired from to put on your resume." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Did you call them?" And they're like, "Yeah." And what they say? They said that they made the most money they ever made when you were there.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Well, you didn't get along with the boss. And so
Mhm.
you quit or you got fired. You guys had a big fight. I'm like, exactly. I'm not ashamed of that. You don't get along with everybody. That happens in life. The job was great. I loved working there. I made great money for
Mhm.
them. We had a great program running, but me and the owner just did not see eye to eye. And sometimes that's life. And
Huge.
I'm not going to hide that from anybody because I am an outgoing personality. I am loud. I am bossy. I can be these things.
Mhm.
So be aware. Just I'm putting it all on the table here. Like, I mean, be aware,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Right. I think you and I probably have very similar
It could burn
traits.
you, but hey.
Yeah. As long as you're up front, I get that all the
Mhm.
time. Like, listen, I'm a lot. Like, I know I'm a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I will do you really well, but like, sometimes you even in your best intentions, you rub people the wrong way. I've had it all throughout my
Oh yeah,
career,
for
just
sure,
my
for sure.
too muchness. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, I
Um,
mean, I've had, and to get real deep, it's like I've had friends in my life where we're best friends for a couple years, and I don't see them for like 2 years, and I know it's because they had enough of me for a while. They're like,
yeah,
that's enough of that guy.
yeah. Too much quotas met. Give me a call back in a couple months.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Birds of
what?
flock of feather.
Exactly. So now, what's ahead for Paisley? Right, like you're young still, right, for having such a storied career and done your time. Right, you've been in the industry 20 years now, so it's kind of no joke. Or coming up on 20 years.
Yeah.
What's the future look like? What are the things that interest you now going forward?
Yeah. So I'm still considering continuing to consult. I have pivoted a little bit, but still maintaining what I normally do. But I've started and at the advice again of my wonderful mentor, Bill Newell, looking into like insurance claims, liability, being subject matter expert for technical cases when they go to litigations, which is really, really interesting.
That's a
Again,
huge
total
niche that no one is really looking at.
it's really wild and like
Hmm.
it's again so very different from working for an owner user, working for a consulting company, working for a fabricator, and it's just this whole other world. And
Hmm.
I'm very fresh and very green in that, but it is very, very neat. You got to be very good with your communication skills, I
Yeah.
guess, which I've had to learn how to hone back
And your
sometimes.
documentation is at another level because you got now not engineers looking at it, but lawyers.
Lawyers, yes. And it's funny because even though you think you're getting paid a lot, you're the lowest paid person on the job. It's crazy. But
Yeah, you're not
yeah,
$500 an hour.
no, yeah, no. So that's been really interesting. And then, as I mentioned, we just started up a new company called the International Welding Bureau, or IWB. I know that there's been some items talking around on the internet. We haven't fully launched yet, but there's kind of two sections, so to speak, of this. And the one section that's my baby, and I'm very excited for when I launch it full time. We're in the alpha testing phase right now. Is MTR reading. So material test reports. It's
Hmm.
basically you can upload MTR via PDF, Word, whatever, and it will basically in less than 5 seconds tell you if that MTR is compliant to ASME Section 2, Alpha or Bravo, and all the ASTM associated specifications to them. And I am super pumped about that
That's a neat
because
tool. Yeah.
I was that person having to review MTRs manually, and they would be stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and
Well,
stacks.
every run has their MTRs. Every length of the coil has its MTR. Every section of pipe cutoff has its MTR. Like they're everywhere.
Everything that's made out
Everything.
of
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
has a birth certificate, so to speak. I'm focusing right now on metals and filler metals at this moment.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's where I'm going with that. We're again in a very initial phases of the MTR portion of the IWB, and we're hoping to have a full launch in May. So it's very
Well, I know I'm on
exciting.
the subscription list because I talked to Juvie about it, and
Yeah,
I'm friends with him and trying to figure out what's going on with it because I've gotten the teasers. I'm on the subscription list, but there's been no updates. I just messaged him like 2 weeks ago, being like, "What's going on, man? You told me January back in December. Now it's we're coming on February. I'm glad it's
yeah.
still moving forward."
Yeah, and then on the welding side, we're going through the phases of, reviewing and developing the weld procedures for this, and kind of going over all the quality manuals and this whole thing. It's a lot of work.
Well, it's
Like the
huge.
idea is fantastic, and how we're going about it, and it's just all of the excess paperwork or background work takes time. And we're talking, thousands of weld procedures alone.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know
sure. Yeah, and there's
thousands,
more every day.
yeah, yeah, and like obviously new materials are popping up,
Hmm.
but the really cool thing about the IWB is take carbon steel, for example. How many people have weld procedures for carbon to carbon? Like thousands, probably hundreds of thousands. I know companies that have over 50 carbon to carbon weld procedures.
Just in their shop. Yeah.
Yeah, just in their shop because, one owner user doesn't like this here, one owner user doesn't like that there, one owner user wants this, So these weld procedures are going to be approved by all the big owners and users and fabricators, etc., and to come to kind of a consensus and be able to utilize basically, I don't want to say silver bullet weld procedures, but very robust weld procedures that will cover, most people's wants, needs, and desires.
That'll still be within scope of all the other accreditation bodies, right?
Correct. Very much so. So it's very exciting. I'm super pumped. Again, things take a little time, but I'm full-fledged. We've got a good chunk of weld procedures going through the pipeline right now, and we've got a lot of interest from owner users, as well as fabricators, mechanical contractors for the welding portion of it, as well as the MTR portion. So once we do a full launch, we have it planned out for May, but give or take some time, always things pop up.
I was going to ask, are you going to have a planned rollout for FabTech in Chicago for September?
I don't know yet.
No. Yeah.
But we can talk to all the partners and that would be super ideal, I'll be honest.
Right, that's ideal. You always want to hit up like the big ones, right?
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what's coming in down the pipeline.
No, that's interesting because I know in the US, and I think I've worked down there a few times when I was still welding, it can be a bit of a dog's breakfast when it comes to standards and codes. Sometimes even a 2 kilometer or a 3.5 mile walk is it'll change. Like if you're on the coast, you're under a maritime annex, you walk in a kilometer into the fab shop, now you're in the AWS world, you walk then you walk another 20 miles in that direction, you crossed over a state line, now all your certs are out the window and start over. But not for some you have to retest, not others. Some have to be in shop, not others. It coming from Canada where it's so standardized up here, it's so I get a ticket and in a shed in Alberta and it's good across the country, right? That doesn't exist in the US. I can very much see where your product and your desire to amalgamate this kind of dog's breakfast into something that makes sense, is coherent. It would be great for everyone, the welder, the fabricator, the shops, everybody. But the title is International Welding Bureau, not the American Welding Bureau. So how do you foresee this being adopted by very established places like Canada, Australia, Germany, France, Switzerland, where they have very robust and solid and accredited, codes and standards?
Yeah. Very interesting question. So, and again, everything varies. As you said, just with alone in the States, everything can be totally different. Even in just the state of Texas, depending on how the company A operates, they may not even care. Unfortunately, that's just how that round. But when you start going into other states, then you might have to go back and retest and this and that. And obviously in Canada, it's the same aspect where if you go now in Canada, most of the people, and I'm going to right now specify in Alberta, most of them are union based, right?
Right?
So they've got their ticket and they're still working through the union, so they likely don't have to retest, because they went and put a CB&I hat on this month, and next month they've got edX or Edmonton Exchanger hat, and next week they have a Malloy or what have you, because it's all through the union, and they're obviously they need to maintain their continuity and all that stuff, but basically the whole approach is to make sure that you're not going through and adding in additional research. Now, if people want to join the organization and be a participating member as a fabricator, as an owner operator, as what have you, they have that ability to go through and have their welders test through the IWB, and then basically have that similar approach as the unions have, where it's okay, you've got your ticket as long as you maintain your continuity, and there's a bunch of other additional items, because the whole point of the IWB is to cultivate, the welder not just to the bare minimum of the code. These are going to be the whole
meet
plan
and exceed.
Yes, exactly. And not just meat, like exceed.
Mhm.
And they're going to be crumb to the crumb welders. It's going to be a very cool thing and a very positive thing to say, yeah, I'm an IWB welder, because it's not just bare minimum code aspect. And how that is integrated in other countries, I can't specify the direct, paths that we have, but we do have
Mhm.
a lot of interest currently from Canada and Australia, actually, and
Mhm.
a few European areas that are quite interested as well. But again, it comes down to the actual participating company in the organization,
Right.
not
Okay.
necessarily just like the country or the jurisdiction, so to speak.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, yeah,
Okay, that's super interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
and there is a push worldwide to standardize. There is,
yeah,
because as we've seen with global markets, that if you don't have some form of standardization, it's a real shoot sometimes for buying
yeah,
stuff. Like,
yeah.
you get steel from certain places on the wrong time of the year, the wrong month, and you're
Hmm.
ordering pipe and it shows up like pigtails, or you're ordering sheet and you can see the lamination before it's even off the truck, and
Yeah.
you're shaking your head being like, how did this pass any type of QC? Then you find out, well, there wasn't really.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. Because they're trying to get it out the door.
that's right. That's right. So there is this desire from the world to standardize, but on the other side of that coin, standardization is extremely expensive, which is
Yes.
why you have seen mainly only the rich countries do it. The
Hmm.
Australias, the Canadas, the Germanys, the Switzerlands. We're the countries that have really set up national standardization, not because it was fun or easy. I mean, those are major jobs, but because we have the money to do it, right?
Yes. And the desire to do right,
Yeah.
obviously everybody wants to go home at the end of the
Be
day,
safe.
and
Yeah.
but these things, and it's really interesting. So for a while I sat on the B51 committee
Hmm.
for Canada, and we were talking about harmonization throughout all of the provinces, and it's such a really key thing. And again, the amount of energy to put into it, not just the economics, not just the cost, like the actual energy to go through, because it's similar. You got to throw something at the wall and it's going to get shot down, and then
Yeah.
it's going to have to be reconfigured, and this, and even when you get something that you're like, okay, as a group, and this isn't a group of 5 or 6, like groups of like 30 plus
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
say, okay, this is how we're going to approach or tackle this issue or problem or what have you, and then you put it in play, and it's going to take oodles of time to evergreen, because you're never going to get it right. And that's where you really got to have the faith of like people, and
Yeah.
it's all sorts of people from all different skill sets, trades, areas, this and that,
Hmm.
and to have the desire. Because on the flip side, if you go through too much of it, then you've got all of this red tape, so you got to
Yeah.
really find this
Yeah.
balance.
The bureaucracy ate the work before it even got done,
Yeah.
which is something I used to hate when I was a shop owner. It's
Hmm.
like, I could have already built 100 of these in the time it took for you to approve the damn thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And we're all sitting around twiddling our thumbs waiting for this, but you get it. This is the
Yeah.
process, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like what weld procedures alone. I cannot tell you how many times I have reviewed the same weld procedure
nothing's
every
changed.
year.
Yeah.
Every year.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so many contractors that, I'm going to talk about refineries, the owner users of refineries have allowed to do work on their site. And if they just go across the state line or cross the border, and it's like, that's the same weld procedure. And you got to sit there and you got to wait so that they send it, and then they got to wait till the next person goes and gets in their emails, and it's for consulting. Then they call me up, hey, do you got time to do this? Yeah, okay, cool. They send it over. Then yeah, I've got a bunch of other stuff. I don't just not always able just to drop it right away.
Mhm.
Obviously prioritization if need be, you do. And then you gotta go through those and update all of this, line out all of the issues, or say no, it's good. And then you usually have questions because like, well, what are you doing? What are you repairing? What's the equipment? What's your jurisdiction? And this could be weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then you
absolutely. For
send
one
it,
simple doc. Yeah.
yeah, send it back, and then they're like, no, we don't agree with you. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, actually
guys,
we're
you're well,
not going to use that wire. We're going to switch the wire. Does that doesn't matter, does it? Uh
like, yeah, yeah. Actually, like, so our sub arc machine is really busy. Can we just use Meg? It's like we didn't send a MIG procedure over.
Yeah.
So,
Let's start over.
you can. Like, I've always had this line
Yeah,
on, you can do whatever you want. Now, is it compliant and responsible? That's another situation.
That's on you.
You know, I'll be happy to look at your NCR afterwards. No problem.
Awesome, Paisley. This has been a great interview. And I've learned a lot already. Now, for yourself, you know, as a woman in the industry who's done well, you don't seem shy. You put your foot out there. You pushed where you needed to push. You know, for so many of the people out there that are getting, you know, that are shy, or so many women that are kind of tentative about entering these industries, you know, what would you say to them? You know, because this podcast is actually going to be released during Women Empowerment Month. So, you know, in terms of an empowered woman yourself, you know, what kind of advice would you give to another woman that's thinking about it, or maybe is on the fence about what they should do?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the hard truth first. You will cry. Like, I cry.
Mhm.
I've cried in bathroom stalls. You know, it's hard. It's not easy. Like, if somebody says, "Oh yeah, I've had a lovely picnic walk and everything's been great and rah rah rah, super awesome," they're lying to you, or they've just had a really good experience.
Yeah,
you
like
know,
one in a
one of
million.
the
Yeah,
two.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough, you know, especially if you go to places like Fort McMurray. I do believe things are changing.
Mhm.
And they have changed from when I was there versus, you know, years prior. Because I've talked to a few female engineers and inspectors, and they're like, "Oh, this is way much better than it was." It's evolving. But never like give up hope. You know, always just try to push to do the right thing and be your best version of yourself. Like, I have point blank messed up things and been cussed out like no tomorrow. And sometimes it is because you're an easy target. I'm not a very large statured woman. I have a big personality, but I come in a very tiny package. And sometimes you do get people thinking, or, you know, being like, "Oh, I can push this one around. She's too friendly, she's too nice. I can just plow through her." And
Yeah.
you just got to be really resilient and just, you know, stand your ground, be open and honest to who you are. And in those cases where you're like, "Hey, this really isn't my vibe," just be honest to yourself. Do I think running at the problem, saying, "Oh, you know, we should all be equal and, well, you should be treating me that way, blah, blah, blah." I don't think that's the best approach. Obviously, attack it in a sense where it's like, "Hey, man, didn't really love what you did there." You know, you got to
Yeah.
be a little appropriate to those things. But overall, I love what I do. I think it's the coolest job in the world. I get to be like a CSI agent and a doctor for metal in some very, very interesting places and spaces. And you'll always meet those people where it's like, "Oh my gosh, you can put your boots on. Go women in industry. Wow."
Yeah.
Oh, and then you get the total opposite side where they won't talk to you at all. I've flown back home before because people didn't treat me nice, and then I had to fly all the way back, and they were much nicer the next time around. So it's never going to be a linear path of how you go about stuff. Just be open and honest to yourself. And if it's something you truly do, I'm a big advocate in the STEM world for women, men, etc. You just got to enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy it, you're going to be miserable, right?
That's great advice. And you know, I want to make a comparison for people here, because I get tired sometimes of women being embarrassed about crying.
Yeah.
Because in my life, and I've worked 33 years in this industry now. It'll be my 33rd year actually this September. That's crazy. But and I taught for 8 years at the college. I've been around. Every time a guy throws his grinder, every time a guy acts tough and punches the wall, every time a guy freaks out and rips his coveralls or does that, that's crying. That's the same. Every time a dude throws a fit and thinks he's all tough and macho looking because he wrecked his grinder on the table or smashed his stinger into a million pieces or thrown his helmet across the room, there is no difference between that tantrum and a woman experiencing fear or sadness or uncertainty and expressing it through crying. That's just the way they're expressing their emotions. And I don't like it when dudes freak out and act like babies and throw tantrums. I actually find it to be the most uncomfortable things when I see a 40-year-old man smashing something because he's upset. All I see is a 4-year-old little baby with a soother.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I see a woman having to go hide because she's crying, I'm like, I would rather the men just cry and deal with it like an adult than smash things like an idiot. Right.
Really. Yeah.
And so I think that there's something we got to just give up and be like, it's okay to have emotions, period.
Yeah, I totally like, and I always tell people, I'm like, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm frustrated, or I don't know what to do. And it's like, I got really good at pinching the back of my ear or my inner elbow just to help suppress it. But it's exactly like you said, it's just an emotional outburst, and there's different ways to do that. And like, it happens. And again, it may not be because you're sad. It's like, I don't know what else to do.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to go smash something because I don't want to, have to deal with the pieces afterwards.
Yeah. And I think guys are like told since they're young, it's okay for you to act like that. Well, actually, no, bro, not really. Like,
yeah. You got to like dial it back. And sometimes you can't. It happens.
No, but
people
then take your
reactive.
5, go for a smoke, go for a walk. Let's, like you said, dial it back. Yeah. And if you want to have a good cry, dude, go have a cry in your vehicle. Yeah. I used to work for a shop, and I hated working there so bad. I'd have to like pull over on the side of the road on the way to work to cry because I didn't want to cry at work. I'd like cry. I'd like pre-cry. I'd pre-cry before I got to work so no one would see me. Right. But then that was the type of job where I'd lose my temper and I'd be frustrated all the time. And then I realized like this job might be a great job and my work is fantastic what I'm doing, but mentally for me, it's not a fit. Right. Yeah. So, and you got to look after yourself.
Yeah, totally. Like we did a high school welding competition on the 1st of February, and there was an instructor there, and she came over and she was like, I would love you to come talk to my kids because all they get told is, oh, well, you're a girl, you can go into nursing or education. And it's like, no, like engineering is so cool. Welding is so cool. Like, inspection is cool. There's so many different opportunities out there. And that's just like oil and gas. Like you could do rockets. You can do, buggies. You could do
mining, everything,
anything. But you gotta A, know it exists, or at least have a path to figure it out, and B, enjoy it. Like if you don't enjoy it, like you're saying, you're just gonna be miserable. It's not a fun time. We spend a lot of time working, like a lot of time working.
Yeah, we do. It's got to be at least neutral. At least neutral. Hopefully positive, but I'll take neutral.
Yeah. Neutral or above.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, Paisley. Well, thank you so much. Any shout outs or anything you'd like to say to the people before we end this interview?
I think we covered it pretty good. Just, find what your passion is, and like, welding's cool shit. I love it. Like, it's like the coolest thing. I get to work with metal and I don't have to deal with blood, which is good. So keep at it. And if anybody has any questions or comments or wants to reach out, I'm completely available. I'll give you my email and my social media as well. Feel free. I'm always down for a chat. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And when we release this podcast, guaranteed, we'll have that information there at the podcast. Are you planning on being at FabTech again in Chicago this year?
I have to look at my schedule. I know I've got lots of commitments and stuff, but I am hoping to. So I haven't committed to it yet.
We just booked our rooms and got started planning it just this week. So if you're there, hopefully see you there. If not, I'm sure I'll catch you somewhere else. We're going to be doing some work down in Houston this year, I think, coming up. So maybe I'll come visit.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot and take care.
All right, you too.
And for all the people that are following and listening, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. Keep downloading, sharing, and commenting. We have a new fan mail feature, which we are getting some great fan mail, although the questions have been kind of silly. Some of them are great. Someone did ask, what's the furthest I've ever gone for a welding job? And the answer to that was Takoradi, Ghana in Africa. So that's my furthest I've gone for a welding job. That was in a gold mine. I was there for 3 months, first turnaround, because I was there for a turnaround, and the next turnaround was a 3-week turnaround for them. So it's fantastic. So keep the questions coming. Love them. And we'll see you at the next episode. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the show.